It's about my hometown, about my community, the one I was brought up with. So it was a personal and a compelling story to tell.
At the very peak of his fame, Sting seemed untouchable. He was a rock god with sold-out arenas, chart-topping anthems, a beautiful wife, and the kind of life that felt like a dream. But in the shadows of all that glory, a single choice would smash that perfect image like glass. What began as a spark became a dangerous flame, igniting a scandal that tore through friendships, fractured his public image, and left him clinging to the one thing he couldn't bear to lose. Who was this woman? And why would Sting risk everything for her? Sting's rise to global spotlight. It's easy to look at Sting, the multi-million-selling musician, the face of an era, the man whose songs have soundtracked weddings, heartbreaks, and late-night radio playlists, and imagine his journey was nothing but a golden road to success. But the truth is far more complicated, because behind the music and fame was a man living a personal story that was anything but perfect. And while the world was putting his records on repeat, his own life was quietly moving toward a chapter marked by betrayal, heartbreak, and a love story born out of scandal. Sting grew up in the shipbuilding town of Wallsend, England. His father was a milkman, while his mother was a hairdresser. Together, they lived a modest life that shaped Sting's childhood and the man he would later become. His earliest inspirations came from jazz and classical records that seemed to carry him far beyond the industrial streets where he grew up. At 16, he got his first guitar, an old, worn instrument that had been left behind by his father's friend, but it was enough to change the way he saw his future. Around that time, he began performing in local clubs and pubs, developing a presence that would later define him on the world stage. The name Sting came before the fame. While playing with a jazz group called the Phoenix Jazzmen, he made a habit of showing up to gigs wearing a black and yellow striped jumper. The band leader joked that he looked like a wasp, and just like that, the nickname stuck. It was short, punchy, and perfect for the man he was becoming. But music wasn't his only path at first. After graduating from Northern Counties College of Education, he took a job as a school teacher in Cramlington. He taught English and kept his day job steady, but never let go of the music. Nights and weekends were for playing gigs, chasing opportunities, and nurturing the growing idea that perhaps he could make a life out of this. By the mid-1970s, Sting was ready to take the leap. He moved to London, where he crossed paths with American drummer Stuart Copeland. The two clicked musically, and in 1977, they were joined by guitarist Andy Summers. Together, they formed The Police, a band that would blend reggae rhythms, punk energy, and pop sensibilities into something fresh and undeniable. The Police wasted no time making their mark. Their debut album, Outlandos d'Amour, in 1978, gave the world Roxanne, a song that radio stations initially hesitated to play. But the track's catchy hook and unconventional storytelling turned it into a breakthrough hit. The follow-up singles further solidified their place on the charts, and each song was layered with Sting's unmistakable voice that could be tender one moment and razor-sharp the next. The band's rise was quick, but not without tension. The Police had a reputation for infighting, yet the creative friction often fueled their success. By 1983, they reached the pinnacle of their career with Synchronicity. The album didn't just succeed, it exploded. Every Breath You Take became an international phenomenon, topping charts in multiple countries and earning the band Grammy Awards. It was a song that sounded romantic at first, but carried an undercurrent of different themes that hinted at the complexity in Sting's own worldview. Soon, Sting had become more than just a frontman. He was one of the most famous musicians in the world. His face was on magazine covers, His voice filled stadiums, and his songwriting earned praise from critics and fans alike. He had built a life many would envy, complete with global fame, financial security, and a respected place in music history. But away from the spotlight, his personal life was under pressure. And as the world celebrated his artistic triumphs, his personal life was facing cracks that the public couldn't yet see. Unfortunately, this shift happening in his private world would soon spill into the headlines and reveal a deeply personal story of love, betrayal, and consequences. The marriage to Frances Tomelty. Many fans don't realize that before Sting became so famous, his life was actually grounded by a woman named Frances Tomelty. Their love story began far from the noise of the music industry, on a theater stage. It was 1974, and Sting had taken a role in Rock Nativity, a modern musical retelling of the biblical story. Frances, an Irish actress from a distinguished artistic family, was cast as the Virgin Mary. And just like that, a relationship that would define Sting's life forever was set in motion. Frances Tomelty was already a respected name in acting circles. Born into a theatrical household, her father, Joseph Tomelty, was a celebrated actor and playwright. She carried herself with quiet confidence. Frances was known for her intensity on stage and her ability to bring depth to every character she portrayed. Sting was immediately captivated by her intelligence and talent, qualities that would draw him in and keep him close. Their relationship developed quickly. Frances was older by a few years, and perhaps because of that, she had a steadiness that contrasted with Sting's growing restlessness. She understood the demands of a creative career, the uncertainty of income, and the unglamorous reality behind the scenes. And by 1976, they were married. The newlyweds settled in Bayswater, a neighborhood in West London, where they lived a modest life that was not yet marked by fame or fortune. Money was tight, and they had to navigate the typical challenges of a young couple trying to build a future. In the same year they married, they welcomed their first child, Joe. Fatherhood was a new chapter for Sting that brought responsibility, but also an emotional anchor in the midst of his early musical pursuits. Frances continued to work steadily as an actress, earning roles on stage and screen. Her career would later span decades, with appearances in acclaimed television series such as Vanity Fair and Silent Witness. Even in those early years, she had the respect of her peers for her skill and professionalism. Sting often acknowledged her influence during this period. In interviews, he credited Frances with helping him mature, personally and artistically. She brought discipline to his chaotic schedule, stability to his personal life, and, perhaps most importantly, belief in his potential. When the Police was formed and began playing small gigs, Frances was there, supporting him while balancing her own career and motherhood. However, as the band's success grew, so did the strain on their marriage. The transition from local musician to international star was fast and overwhelming. Tours kept him away for long stretches, sometimes months at a time. The Police were not just performing, they were conquering the charts across continents. That kind of momentum demanded sacrifice, and the cost was often personal. While Sting traveled the world, Frances maintained the household and cared for their children. Their second child, a daughter named Fuchsia Catherine, was born in 1982. But by then, the gap between their lives had widened. Sting was living in hotel rooms and airports, constantly surrounded by bandmates, crew members, and fans. Frances, on the other hand, was managing life in London, raising two young children and continuing her work in acting. Fame is rarely a neutral force in a marriage. For some, it strengthens the bond. For others, it exposes the cracks. In Sting and Frances's case, the combination of physical distance, emotional fatigue, and the intoxicating pull of celebrity life began to erode the connection they had once shared. Despite the growing challenges, Frances remained supportive in public. She attended events, appeared with him at premieres, and maintained the image of a united couple. Privately, however, the pressures were becoming harder to ignore. The marriage that had started with artistic passion and mutual respect was showing signs of emotional distance. What made their situation more complicated was the world in which they lived. The entertainment industry is a small circle, especially in Britain during the late 1970s and early 80s. Actors, musicians, and directors often moved in overlapping social circles, attending the same parties, working on collaborative projects, and sharing mutual friends. And in such a close-knit environment, boundaries could easily blur. By 1984, the shift in Sting's personal life was undeniable. There were whispers in social circles about changes in his relationship, though nothing was yet public. Insiders could sense the tension. Something was unfolding, and it would soon become one of the most talked-about stories in British celebrity culture. Without any warning, Sting found himself in the middle of a personal entanglement that would place him at the center of a scandal and forever change the story of his private life. Personal battles and controversies. On stage, Sting looked like he had it all under control. The sharp suits, the perfect stage presence, and the voice that could command an arena made him seem untouchable. But away from the lights and applause, his life was much more complicated. Fame gave him success, but it also brought pressures and struggles that nearly broke him. During his years with the Police, Sting was dealing with something most fans never saw. He later revealed that he had battled depression and even bipolar disorder, especially when the band was at its peak. It was a time when he should have been celebrating, but instead, he often felt heavy and disconnected. In interviews, he confessed there were moments when he struggled deeply, admitting that his moods could swing dramatically and leave him feeling chemically imbalanced. The non-stop touring schedule only made things worse. When you're flying from city to city, sleeping in hotel rooms, and performing for thousands every night, it's easy to feel detached from real life. Sting described it as being trapped in a cycle of the adrenaline rush of the concert, followed by long stretches of emptiness once the show ended. Music became his way of working through it all. Many of his songs carried pieces of his inner battles. King of Pain, for example, was more than just a hit single. It was a window into his sense of loneliness and struggle. Later, after the death of his father, he poured his grief into The Soul Cages, an album that was both dark and deeply personal. Writing and performing those songs wasn't just about making music, it was therapy. Sting also turned to other ways of caring for himself. He became a dedicated student of Ashtanga yoga, a demanding form of yoga that requires strength, focus, and discipline. Alongside that, he followed a macrobiotic diet, a way of eating focused on whole, natural foods to help his body and mind stay balanced. These practices became more than routines. They were tools to keep him steady in a career that constantly pushed him to his limits. Even with these efforts, his career had moments of collapse. In 2019, Sting had to cancel several shows due to illness. Fans were disappointed, but he made it clear that health now came before anything else. After decades of pushing himself for the sake of music, he had learned the hard way that burnout could be dangerous. And so, he decided to make time for recovery, quiet, and family. But his personal challenges weren't only about health. There were also some controversies. In the early days, Sting experimented with substances, something not unusual in the rock scene at the time. He's spoken about those years without romanticizing them, admitting that the lifestyle could easily spiral out of control. In an interview, he openly admitted, "Some people can cope with it perfectly well. I'm not here to make rules, or even state that there should be any rules. Drugs are dangerous, without a doubt. At the same time, they can be useful tools. but they need to be thought about as tools. But that wasn't the only challenge Sting faced. He also had to deal with tensions within his band, the Police. The band's success was massive, but so was the friction between its members. Sting's creative vision sometimes clashed with Stuart Copeland's fiery personality and Andy Summers' artistic ideas. Arguments happened often, even in the middle of recording sessions or just before stepping on stage. Sting has since admitted that he could be difficult to work with. His perfectionism, while a strength in creating music, also made him demanding and sometimes controlling. The strain eventually led to the band's breakup in 1986, at the height of their fame. While they reunited for a hugely successful tour in 2007, the old tensions were still there beneath the surface. Outside of band drama, Sting also faced criticism for some of his lifestyle choices and public statements. His wealth, his high-profile relationships, and even his spiritual practices sometimes drew media attention. And for someone used to controlling his art, it was frustrating to see the press focus on his private life instead of his music. However, Sting learned that managing his mental health and personal life was an ongoing process. He's been open about how fragile that balance can be, even now. Wellness, yoga, and family time aren't just hobbies for him, they are his survival tools. By the time the scandal that would rock his first marriage broke into the headlines, Sting was already carrying the weight of these inner battles. The affair that followed would not just be a public controversy, it would unfold against the backdrop of a man already fighting to hold himself together. The affair that changed everything. In the early 1980s, Sting's private life took a turn that would dominate headlines and redefine his public image. At the center of it all was Trudie Styler, a woman who was not just part of his social circle, but also one of Francis Tomelty's closest friends. Trudie was an actress and film producer, known in her own right, but in those days she was more often recognized in connection to Francis. The two women had been friends for years, sharing a bond built on mutual respect and the kind of trust that comes from living side by side. In fact, Trudie lived quite close to Sting and Francis in Bayswater, London. Their homes were so close that it was common for them to see each other daily. But Sting first met Trudie in 1977, the same year the Police was formed. At the time, she was just part of the wider group of friends who floated in and out of their lives. In an interview, Trudie confessed that the first time she saw Sting in person was on a random day when he was walking down the road. She immediately thought to herself, "I fancy that guy with green hair." Over time, their paths crossed more often, partly because of proximity, partly because of shared interests, and partly because Trudie was already embedded in the couple's world. In his autobiography, Sting later confessed that meeting Trudie was a love-at-first-sight moment. And by around 1982, something had shifted. Sting was at the height of his career with the Police, touring extensively and spending long periods away from home. His marriage to Francis was already under strain from distance, fame, and emotional disconnect. In that space, a different kind of closeness began to form between him and Trudie. What started as a casual friendship began to deepen into something more intimate. Both Sting and Trudie have since admitted the situation was far from ideal. In an interview years later, Trudie called it the least ideal situation and added bluntly, "Neither of us are proud of a situation that happened. It just happened." They both knew the weight of what they were doing, and that their relationship was crossing a line that would wound people they cared about. But they also acknowledged that there was an undeniable connection between them, one that became harder to ignore. In his memoir, Sting wrote about Trudie with words that revealed how deeply he felt for her, even in those early days. He described her as a damaged angel and someone who had her own scars and her own complicated history, and yet carried a strength and vulnerability that drew him in. It wasn't a light or fleeting attraction. It was something he couldn't step away from, despite the consequences. By 1983, the affair had moved beyond secrecy because that year, Trudie became pregnant. It was a moment that made the situation impossible to hide any longer. For Sting, it was both a personal turning point and a public one. The timing meant that the truth about his relationship with Trudie and the breakdown of his marriage to Francis was now unavoidable. In 1984, Trudie gave birth to their first child together, a daughter named Bridget Michael, known as Mickey. The arrival of Mickey made their relationship a permanent reality, but it also came with a storm of scrutiny. The fact that Trudie had been Francis's close friend and neighbor turned what could have been a private marital split into a headline-grabbing scandal. The media quickly picked up the story, framing it as a betrayal not just of a spouse, but of a friendship. It was the kind of narrative that tabloids thrived on: the rock star, the wife, the best friend, and the affair. For a man already navigating personal battles with mental health and public pressures, the glare of this new attention was intense. In the years since, Sting and Trudie have both spoken with some regret about how their relationship began. They've never tried to romanticize the pain it caused, especially for Francis. At the same time, they've acknowledged that their bond was real and lasting, something they felt compelled to pursue, even if it began under circumstances they wouldn't wish to repeat. For Francis, the affair was more than a private heartbreak. It was a public unraveling of her marriage, her home life, and a friendship she had once valued deeply. But for Sting, it was the start of a new chapter with a woman who would eventually become his partner for life. But before that could happen, there would be a period of fallout that would include the official end of his marriage, a media frenzy, and the challenge of rebuilding his personal life while still standing in the world's spotlight. The fallout and divorce. By 1984, the unraveling of Sting's marriage to Frances Tomelty was complete. What had begun as private marital strain had exploded into a public scandal that was impossible to contain. The affair with Trudie Styler wasn't just a personal matter anymore. It was a headline, a talking point, and, for many, a betrayal that couldn't be overlooked. The divorce was finalized that same year, and it marked the end of an 8-year marriage and a chapter of Frances' life that had begun with love, partnership, and shared dreams. She never remarried, and in the years that followed, Frances continued her acting career with the same quiet professionalism she had always shown. However, this time she chose to keep her personal life away from public view. For Sting, the separation was equally life-altering, though in different ways. As the legal proceedings played out, he and Trudie left London and fled to Jamaica. It wasn't a glamorous escape, but a way to get away from the tabloid storm and the endless speculation swirling around them. The Caribbean offered distance, privacy, and space to process the chaos they had left behind in England. In an interview, he admitted, "Jamaica was a kind of refuge, and obviously a great influence on my own musical DNA with reggae. So I felt I owed a debt to Jamaica. When Shaggy said, 'Will you come do this show for the hospital that I fund?' I felt like it was an ideal opportunity to give back to this island that had given me so much." But the emotional weight of what had happened followed him there. It was during this period, in the heat and isolation of Jamaica, that Sting wrote King of Pain. While the song had layers of meaning, it also carried the mark of his own inner conflict at the time. The title itself became a symbol and a reflection of guilt, loss, and the complicated feelings of starting a new relationship in the ashes of another. The fallout extended beyond the legal and emotional. Sting's friendships were affected, some permanently. The fact that Trudie had been Frances's close friend made the betrayal more personal for many in their social circle. People took sides. Some distanced themselves entirely, while others stayed connected but with caution. And so, the tight-knit community of actors, musicians, and industry insiders they had once shared was no longer a neutral ground. Public opinion wasn't kind either. While Sting was still admired for his music, the affair and its circumstances tarnished his image for some fans. Tabloids portrayed him as selfish, reckless, and arrogant, the rock star who thought he could have whatever he wanted, no matter who it hurt. But Sting himself didn't try to dodge the fact that lives had been disrupted. He knew his actions had consequences, especially on Frances. The shadow of the past never completely disappeared. Interviews and profiles written about Sting in the mid to late 1980s almost always mentioned the affair and the way it had ended his marriage to Frances. It became part of his story, whether he wanted it to be or not. The divorce may have closed one door for Sting, but it also opened another that would lead to decades of partnership, family, and shared work with Trudie. The controversy surrounding how it began would never completely fade, but over time, it was overshadowed by the life they built. Sting and Trudie's life together. After several years of being together, enduring public scrutiny, and rebuilding their lives away from the headlines, Sting and Trudie Styler finally made their relationship official. In August 1992, they married in a grand ceremony at their estate in Wiltshire, England. Their wide circle of friends, actors, musicians, and artists all gathered to witness a union that had once been clouded by controversy but had grown into a lasting partnership. By then, they were already parents to their daughter, Bridget, Mickey Michael, and son Jake. But after the wedding, their family expanded further with the birth of daughter Elliot Pauline and youngest son Giacomo. Their home life was a blend of music, art, and travel, but at its core, it was anchored by a commitment to raising their children in as grounded a way as possible, even while living across multiple countries. Speaking about their marriage in an interview, Trudie said, "We loved each other, and we lived together, and then we got married, and we had more kids, and that's our life story." Together, Sting and Trudie built a lifestyle that reflected both their success and their shared passions. They maintained a home in Wiltshire, a stylish residence in New York City, and a sprawling property in Tuscany, Italy. In Tuscany, they transformed part of their estate into a working vineyard and organic farm, producing wine, olive oil, and other artisanal products. It wasn't just a business, but a way to stay connected to the land and a slower pace of life. Beyond their personal projects, both remained active in humanitarian and creative work. Trudie became a UNICEF ambassador, using her platform to advocate for children's rights and environmental issues. She also pursued a successful career as a filmmaker, producing and directing films that earned critical recognition. Sting continued his music career, touring and recording, but also exploring acting and philanthropy. He and Trudie often combined their talents for charity, hosting benefit concerts and fundraising events. Over the years, they developed a reputation not just as a couple, but as partners in meaningful work, using their fame to support causes they believed in. When speaking about their marriage, Sting has often emphasized the importance of both love and friendship in their relationship. "We're friends too. We love each other, but we actually like each other, and that's an important distinction there." This statement effectively sums up the balance that has kept them together for decades. For a relationship that began under such intense public judgment, the ability to evolve into a stable, supportive partnership is something they both take pride in. Sting once said, "People say to me, 'How has it lasted this long?' I say, well, it's kind of a miracle, but we don't take it for granted. Love is passion and all of that stuff, but actually, liking somebody and enjoying someone's company is something slightly different, and it lasts longer. Be married to your best friend." After over 30 years of marriage, Their bond has grown stronger and more grounded in deep mutual respect. They have raised 4 children together, each carving their own path in music, art, or other creative fields. And they have become grandparents to 8 grandchildren. Family remains at the center of their lives, with a blended dynamic that included Sting's children from his marriage to Frances Tomelty. What began as a relationship surrounded by scandal has transformed into one of the most enduring partnerships in the entertainment world. And while the story of how they came together will always be part of their history, it is their decades of shared life, work, and family that have truly defined them. What do you think about the controversial way Sting and Trudie got together? Drop your answers in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.